For the last decade, the Western gaming industry has been telling itself a story. A bedtime story. The kind designed to help you sleep through the nightmare. When a high-profile Western studio collapses, when a $300 million franchise enters a death spiral, when another legendary developer becomes a cautionary tale, we don't panic. We reach for our list of convenient villains. It's corporate greed. It's shareholders and risk aversion. It's the toxic players. And depending on which corner of the internet you live in, there's an even louder version. It's woke DEI consultants. These explanations are popular because they contain just enough truth to feel righteous. They give us someone to blame, someone to burn in effigy while Rome smolders behind us. But more importantly, they offer us comfort. They allow us to believe that the West still holds the secret recipe for greatness. That we're not dying, we're just distracted. That our dominance is still intact, just temporarily obscured. Like keys in a couch cushion. Like glasses on top of your head. We tell ourselves, we haven't lost it. We've just misplaced it. But then the East showed up, with a mechanical precision that left Western analysts scrambling like roaches when the kitchen lights turn on, desperately reaching for a new set of excuses. It's just government subsidies. They're just copying the Souls formula. It's cheap labor and crunch culture. Notice the pattern? Every time the evidence becomes uncomfortable, we reach for a new container to dump our anxiety into. A convenient label. A pre-packaged explanation that makes us feel smart without having to think. I call these the lazy buckets, because that's exactly what they are. Emergency receptacles for all the discomfort we can't process. We pour our fear into them, slap a label on top, and tell ourselves we've figured it out. We haven't. We've just avoided looking at the scoreboard. Because if the rise of Chinese AAA is just a fluke, just cheap labor or stolen ideas, then we don't have to change. We can just wait for the bubble to burst. We can stay comfortable. But what if the uncomfortable truth isn't political? What if it isn't moral? What if it isn't about fairness or values or any of the frames we use to avoid the mirror? What if the problem is simply competence? What if they aren't rising because they're cheating? What if they're rising because their systems are faster, their talent pool is deeper, and their execution is more disciplined than anything the West has produced in a decade? Today, we're moving past the headlines. We're going to systematically dismantle every lazy explanation the Western media feeds you, and show you the actual engine behind the meteoric rise of Chinese gaming. This isn't a video about China winning. This is a video about the West losing the ability to tell itself the truth. When we talk about the shift in global gaming, the media loves to use the word winning. Who won the year? Who had the most downloads? Who took the Game of the Year trophy? But winning is a static concept, a snapshot, a moment frozen in time, a scoreboard that resets every January. If you want to understand the existential threat facing Western dominance, you have to stop looking at who is winning and start looking at who is rising. Because winning is a point on a graph, rising is the slope. Think of it in terms of parity. For 30 years, Western AAA was the undisputed 100, the gold standard, the benchmark for fidelity, scope, narrative execution. During that same era, the Chinese industry was dismissed as a 30, a distant ecosystem of mobile clones and pay-to-win MMO slop that real gamers didn't take seriously. The danger isn't that China suddenly jumped to 110. The danger is that they've reached a consistent 90. And before you dismiss 90% as not good enough, let me define what that parity actually looks like. It's not one dimension. It's a bundle. Production value, combat feel, technical fidelity, launch competence, identity clarity, post-launch cadence. When a competitor hits 90% parity across all these dimensions, the 10% gap that remains isn't a moat. It's not a barrier to entry. It's a rounding error. At 90% parity, the consumer stops asking, "Is this as good as the Western version?" and starts asking a much more dangerous question. Why does the Western version cost twice as much and take 3 years longer to ship? This is the power of momentum. A rising system isn't just making better games, it's building compounding advantages. Every project internalizes the lessons of the last. Every success funds a more efficient pipeline. Every failure is treated as a hardware update, not a moral catastrophe. The West is playing defense, protecting legacy, justifying why the old way still matters. China is playing velocity. And in a digital, global, real-time industry, velocity eats legacy for breakfast. To understand why the West is hemorrhaging its grip on AAA gaming, we first have to address the excuses we use to explain it away. These are the lazy buckets, the pre-packaged rationalizations that allow us to dismiss excellence without having to study it, without having to learn from it, without having to change. Let's tear them apart one by one. Bucket A. Western games are failing because of capitalism, or corporatism. This is the favorite cope of media critics and Reddit intellectuals, and it fails the basic logic test. Capitalism didn't suddenly appear in 2024. Large corporations didn't suddenly appear in 2024. Shareholder pressure didn't suddenly appear in 2024. These were already the operating conditions when BioWare made Mass Effect, when Rockstar made Red Dead Redemption, and when Blizzard shipped Warcraft 3, albeit inside leaner, faster, and more execution-driven organizations. And even today, those same corporate pressures exist globally. Chinese publishers operate inside shareholder-driven, profit-seeking mega-corporate structures as well. Tencent isn't a worker co-op. NetEase isn't a non-profit. Which means capitalism, even in its modern, financialized form, cannot be the deciding variable. The difference isn't the presence of capital, it's how effectively that capital is converted into execution. Blaming greed or corporatism is intellectual cowardice. It's a way to avoid talking about the real rot: management bloat, production indiscipline, and 30 years of institutional baggage that now suffocates every major Western studio. Bucket B. Chinese games are just the product of cheap labor. This is an industrial age explanation for an information age reality, and it's embarrassingly lazy. You can't cheap labor your way into high-end technical art. You can't slave labor your way into a complex combat system that rivals From Software's decade of mastery. AAA games aren't assembled on a factory floor by interchangeable workers stamping parts. They are built by senior engineers, technical artists, and systems designers. High-value, highly mobile professionals. People who could work anywhere in the world. Yes, lower labor costs can help you scale a project, but they cannot explain the identity, the polish, or the execution of the final product. Using cheap labor as your dismissal is just another way of pretending that skill is a commodity you can buy by the hour. That excellence is just a matter of throwing enough bodies at the problem. It's cope. And it's dangerous cope, because it stops you from asking the real question. Why are their systems producing better results per dollar than ours? Bucket C. They just copy. This is the most common and the most dangerous rationalization. Every rising power in history started by copying. Japan copied the West's electronics. Korea copied the West's ships and cars. The United States copied Europe's industrial blueprints and manufacturing techniques. Copying is not a sign of weakness. It is the most efficient form of education. It's the process of internalizing a standard so deeply that you can eventually surpass it. The real story isn't that China copied the Souls formula. The real story is that they internalized it so thoroughly, down to the combat timing, the camera systems, the difficulty philosophy, that they are now shipping titles that feel more Souls-like than half the games coming out of the West that claim the same lineage. When your copy is more faithful to the source material than your own attempts, the problem isn't the copier. The problem is you. Bucket D. It's all government or 10-cent money. Money does not write code. If a massive budget was the only requirement for a masterpiece, Ubisoft and EA would be flawless. The West has more old money in gaming than any other region on Earth. We have legacy studios sitting on billion-dollar war chests. And yet, we watch $200 million projects vanish into thin air after 2 weeks. We watch sure things collapse under their own weight. The existence of capital is not the engine. The engine is conversion efficiency. The ability to turn a dollar of investment into a dollar of visible, playable quality on the screen. And by that metric, the West is getting destroyed. Strip away all the cope, all the excuses, all the comfortable lies, and you're left with one reality the Western media is terrified to say out loud. They aren't cheating. They're just becoming more competent than we are. But that raises a harder question. Why? Why now? Why games? And why is the West so unwilling to accept it? There's a deeper reason the West keeps reaching for lazy explanations, and it has nothing to do with games. It's because acknowledging Chinese AAA competence requires acknowledging something far more uncomfortable. China is no longer a catching-up country. AAA games are not a startup product. They are not something you brute force with money or policy. They are one of the most complex civilian products a modern society can produce. To ship a high-end AAA title, you need a massive pool of senior engineers, highly trained technical artists, reliable digital infrastructure, fast internal logistics, stable power, networking and tooling, a culture capable of long-term iteration without institutional panic. In other words, you need a fully developed system. This is why gaming matters, not culturally, structurally. Games sit at the frontier of complexity. They quietly measure how well a society converts education, infrastructure, logistics, and coordination into execution. For decades, the West assumed this frontier belonged to us by default, that it was an extension of cultural dominance, that other countries could manufacture hardware, but not mastery. What Chinese AAA exposes is not cheating. It exposes parity, not just in talent, but in systems. Western media still talks about Chinese studios like isolated anomalies, but they are not exceptions. They are outputs. Outputs of a country that has spent the last 20 years building logistics networks, technical education pipelines, urban density, digital infrastructure, production discipline at a scale the West now struggles to match. Gaming is simply where this competence becomes impossible to disguise. And because the West hasn't emotionally accepted this shift, it keeps misdiagnosing the cause. It keeps treating a systemic transition as a scandal, a trick, a distortion. But you don't fake this level of execution. You don't stumble into it. You arrive there after everything else is already in place. That's the part we refuse to say out loud. Now that we understand the development threshold, we can finally talk about execution. Not ideology, not excuses, but actual execution. The West is facing a crisis of paper tiger budgets. Every year now, we see the same headlines: 200 million, 300 million, sometimes $400 million for a single game. Numbers so large, they're meant to end the conversation before it begins. But here's the question no one asks. What does that money actually become? Because when you look closely at where it goes, a staggering portion never turns into gameplay at all. It dissolves into organizational friction, middle management layers stacked like sedimentary rock, years of pre-production that never escape PowerPoint purgatory, marketing budgets large enough to fund a second game, and entire departments dedicated to legal review and ideological compliance that don't improve a single frame of animation. Not $1 of it reaches the screen. And in 2024 and 2025, we watched the consequences arrive. Skull and Bones, over a decade in development, repeatedly rebooted, hundreds of millions consumed before shipping as a directionless husk. Concord, years of development, massive investment, dead within weeks. Starfield, over $300 million spent on a game so unfocused that "it's not for you" became the studio's own defense. These weren't small bets that failed. They were institutional commitments that became too expensive to abandon, so they shipped the wreckage anyway. Now look at the Chinese model. Black Myth Wukong was built for a fraction of what Western AAA routinely costs. Tens of millions, not hundreds. And yet what appears on screen is combat with weight, art direction with absolute confidence, and a complete identity that never apologizes for what it is. This is conversion efficiency. Not how much money you spend, but how much of that money survives the system long enough to reach the player. Chinese studios convert capital into visible quality at a vastly higher rate, because they aren't drowning in decades of institutional scar tissue. Fewer committees filtering every decision, shorter feedback loops, less fear-driven paralysis. They aren't paying for the infrastructure of Western decline. They're paying for the game. But here's what should terrify Western studios. That efficiency doesn't just produce better games, it produces freedom. When your project costs $40 million instead of $400 million, failure is painful but survivable. You can prototype 5 combat systems, test them, scrap 3, and rebuild the survivors until one finally sings. You can be wrong repeatedly without ending careers. But when your burn rate approaches $400 million, you don't get iteration. You get one shot, one vision, one director's bet that no one dares challenge once the money starts flowing. And when that bet is wrong, you ship it anyway. Because pivoting at Western scale isn't a design choice, it's a financial catastrophe. Every month of delay burns tens of millions. Every redesign forces you to explain why $500 million was aimed at the wrong target. Every admission of failure threatens the entire chain. So bad ideas survive in the West, not because they're good, but because killing them costs more than shipping them. We've built a system where failure is too expensive to fix, so we just release it. Slap live service on the corpse, promise a roadmap, and hope players don't notice it was dead on arrival. That's not a creative failure. That's a structural trap. And China never walked into it. While we were optimizing budgets for investor presentations, they were optimizing for iteration speed. While we built departments to review risk, they built tools to test combat feel. While we explained why we couldn't pivot, they failed 5 times and shipped the 6th attempt as a finished game. This is what execution looks like when the system isn't built to protect itself from the truth. And we're watching it destroy every comfortable assumption we had about how AAA games get made. Even if we could match their conversion efficiency, even if we could afford to iterate like they do, there's a rot that runs deeper than economics. Western culture decided that the core desires games satisfy are morally unacceptable. Power means hierarchy. To feel powerful, someone else must be weak. Beauty means desire. To be beautiful, someone else must be plain. Mastery means excellence. To win, someone else must lose. Fantasy is the space where we let ourselves want these things without apology. But Western culture looked at these desires and decided they were the problem. Power became toxic masculinity. Beauty became objectification. Excellence became elitism. And hierarchy, the fundamental structure of achievement itself, became oppression. So, we built an entire apparatus designed to fix player desires before they could become games. We didn't hire the best designers. We hired ideologues who believe games exist to teach better values. We gave creative control to people who think player fantasy is a social disease requiring correction. The result? NPCs that sound like HR training videos. Romances engineered for representation quotas. 4 sexualities, 6 ethnicities, 0 chemistry. Because chemistry requires preference, and preference violates the equality mandate. Character designs reviewed to ensure no one is too attractive, too powerful, too aspirational. Because aspiration implies some people are worth aspiring to, and that's hierarchical. And hierarchy is violence. Games built to survive a Twitter audit, not to be played, not to inspire desire, to be morally compliant. We took the medium designed to let you feel exceptional and made it a vehicle for teaching you that no one should be. Meanwhile, in the East, they never accepted the premise. They ask one question: what do players want to feel? Wukong, a god killer, masculine, violent, unapologetic power fantasy. Phantom Blade Zero, lethal, graceful, beautiful. Marvel Rivals, hypersexualized characters with impossible bodies. Because that's what superheroes are. Aspirational, not relatable, not body positive, better than you. The Chinese understand something the West forgot. People don't play games to be reminded that everyone is equal. They play to escape that lie. We optimized for ideology. They optimized for desire. We optimized for moral compliance. They optimized for excellence. And here's the part that should enrage you. The people who demanded this don't even play games. The activists who screamed for representation, they moved on to the next cause the moment they got their way. The journalists who praised inclusive design, they never even finished the games they review. We reshaped an entire industry to appease people who were never going to be customers. And the real customers, the ones who actually wanted to feel powerful and free, went somewhere else. They went east. For decades, made in China in gaming was a punchline. Asset flips, predatory gacha, low-quality clones. But we are witnessing the most significant shift in global entertainment since the rise of the Japanese console era in the 1980s. And I didn't see it coming. For most of my life, I only played Western games. They were the gold standard, the pinnacle, the only games that mattered. But as I sit here on the last day of 2025, looking back at the year that just passed, I realized something I wasn't prepared to admit. Most of the games I actually played this year were Chinese. Not by choice, not to prove a point, but because when I sat down to play, those were the games that made me stay. Hundreds of hours in Marvel Rivals, deep in Where Winds Meet right now. I tried the big Western RPGs throughout the year. I gave them every chance. I couldn't finish them. I just couldn't connect anymore. I couldn't stand staring at another deliberately ugly character for 60 hours. I couldn't stomach another dialogue tree that sounded like it was written by HR. I couldn't pretend to care about another sanitized, focus-grouped vision that stood for nothing. And when I look toward the future, when I think about what I'm actually excited to play, I realize something even more uncomfortable. My most anticipated games for 2026 are all from the East. Phantom Blade Zero, Blood Message, Crimson Desert. Every single one. Not one apologizing for what it is. Not one asking permission to be cool. And I'm okay with that. Because this was never about geography. This was always about excellence. The West still has advantages. Legacy IPs that span decades, global marketing machines, institutional knowledge you can't buy overnight. But in late 2025, those advantages are starting to look less like assets and more like anchors. The real crisis facing Western gaming isn't a lack of talent. It isn't a lack of money. It's a lack of honesty. And that dishonesty is compounded by the mainstream narrative around our industry. As long as we keep reaching for the lazy buckets, blaming capitalism, blaming toxic audiences, blaming government subsidies, we will never address the rot in our own systems. The rise of Chinese AAA is a mirror. It shows us what a focused, high-velocity, high-competence system looks like when it stops making excuses and starts making games. It reminds us that players don't care about your carefully worded statements. They care about 120 frames per second on their screen and the integrity of the vision behind it. For 30 years, the West ran this race alone. We set the standard. We built the language. We defined excellence. And then we got comfortable. We got heavy. We started believing our dominance was a matter of destiny. But somewhere in Hangzhou, in Shanghai, in Shenzhen, studios were waking up at 6 a.m., learning, iterating, shipping, building infrastructure while we built committees, executing with precision while we optimized for compliance. The moment your competitor stops being a joke is the moment you realize you've been lying to yourself. Because once competence becomes the only explanation left, all the comfortable excuses stop working. And for the Western games industry, the excuses just ran out.